Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for our August Tea Talk. And we appreciate those who joined us from last month when we did have some technology difficulties. So we wanted to invite Jennifer to join us for August because we wanted to make sure that we all had the ability to hear her and to listen to her story and take what she says about disability advocacy and how we can do our part to continue the process as well. So as always, our Tea Talks are hosted by Access Alaska every month during the lunch hour. And we talk about disability advocacy, and disability rights around the country and also around the globe. So today we're joined with Jennifer Keelan-Chaffins, and in a moment she's going to introduce herself, but just briefly for everyone, if you're new to Tea Talk, excuse me, we're going to have Jennifer, talk or give her speech. We're going to talk to her, going to go over a PowerPoint with her. She's going to give us a presentation, and we're going to be able to open it up for questions. So if you guys have any questions based on her story or her experiences, feel free to put those in the Q&A section, and Jennifer is going to do her best to answer them for you. Keeping a friendly reminder as well that our Tea Talks, we love to give out door prizes. So we're going to randomly choose a couple of door prizes attendees to receive our door prizes today, which we'll discuss a little bit later on in our presentation on what the door prize actually is, because it's actually pretty exciting this time. So just to get started, let's go ahead and start. So I've always been fascinated in hearing people's stories, especially if they relate to them having a career path from that story. And I think especially these days, it's a little rare to hear that someone's path follows a straight line from where they started to where they are today. So Jennifer, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about what or who your inspiration to get into advocacy was and some of your experiences along the way?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Keelan-Chaffins. I'm a passionate advocate and activist for disability rights. And I joined the disability rights movement at age 6. And then at age 8, I participated in the famous Capitol Crawl protest in support of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I am currently the owner of Jennifer Keelan-Chaffins LLC and JKC Legacy. And my company's motto is to educate, advocate, empower. And I am focused on educating the next generation about the importance of the ADA and its part in American history, with an emphasis on education, advocacy, and empowerment. My greatest inspiration for getting involved in advocacy is first and foremost, my family was a humongous support system, and then meeting and being a part of the disability rights movement and all of the advocates involved. This would be Justin Dart, the father of the ADA, Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, and Dwayne French, as you guys may know. And these were my teachers and my mentors growing up. And they were the ones who taught me not only how to fight for my rights, but also how to fight and stand up for the rights of others.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. So if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and share your PowerPoint.
That would be great.
All right. Let's jump right into that. Here we go. And share. Okay.
So I would like to thank Access Alaska for giving me this awesome opportunity to speak with you guys and to share my story. My sister Kaylee and I had experienced many forms of discrimination at a very young age, and we became aware of being separated because of my disability. For instance, when my mom was trying to find a daycare center, she was told that they would accept Kaylee because she was able-bodied and could walk, but that I would have to go to a separate daycare center because they were unable to take me due to my disability and there was no wheelchair access. So I attended a school named Tempe Center for the Handicapped, and my sister went to a different daycare center. When it came time for me to start kindergarten, the neighborhood school that I could see from my front yard was not wheelchair accessible because there were no curb cuts or physical access that would accommodate my wheelchair. Nor did the school have a special education program that could meet my needs. The same was true for public transportation. When Kaylee, Mom, and I had tried to use the public bus to go downtown, and we're denied access. And we're told that the lift was bolted down and was only there for show, but not to use. This was to make it look like they were complying with the federal mandate that was already in place, set forth by the Urban Mass Transit Act of 1970. This act mandated that all new buses be equipped with lifts, but this mandate was not being recognized or enforced. And that was the reason why we were denied access to the bus. And in this first slide, or on the second slide, this is a picture of me and my little sister Kaylee, and we were attending a protest in Atlanta, Georgia in 1989. We're protesting the lack of wheelchair accessible buses for public transportation. At the time, Kaylee and I were learning sign language. So we were both signing access now in this photo. And I have two protest signs attached to my wheelchair. One says, "Stop discrimination now," with a sticker that says, "Give me a lift." And the other says, "Greyhound is a dirty dog." This is one of my favorite photos. And then please move to slide 3. I was introduced to disability rights when I was 6 years old. The disability rights group of DAP National came to Phoenix, which was where I was living at the time, to protest the lack of wheelchair accessible buses. My mom's cousin and family friend, Diane Coleman, came to Phoenix to attend the protest and stayed at our house. They invited Mom and I and Sister Kaylee to attend the protest and strategy meetings, and we were excited to see what the protests were all about. When I first met ADAPT and co-founder Wade Blank and other members of the disability rights movement, this was the first time I'd ever seen other people with disabilities, just like myself, who were fighting for their civil rights and the right to be treated like everyone else with dignity and respect, and the right to have full and equal access to all areas of society. This is where Kaylee and I learned that having a disability could be very empowering. This is also where we learned that separate is not equal, and Brown versus the Board of Education of 1954. It is also where we learned about the 504 Rehab Act of 1973 and about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. To Kaylee and I, this was very important because it meant that we did not have to be separated from each other. We could go to the same school together and ride the bus together. Both Kaylee and I had decided that we wanted to become involved in the movement. And by the end of the weekend, I was leading the protest through the streets of downtown Phoenix. And in this picture, on this slide, this is a picture of my mom, my sister Kaylee, and me and Bob Kafka from ADAPT National. And we are at a very first protest in Phoenix, Arizona. We are all being interviewed by a Phoenix reporter. Please move to slide 4. At our second protest in San Francisco, this is where we met many of the iconic leaders of the movement. This included Justin Dart Jr., the father of the ADA, and members of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, or DREDF, including Judy Heumann, who is known for the 504 sit-in protest, and Ed Roberts, one of the leaders of the independent living movement. These were my teachers and my mentors growing up. They taught me how to fight and stand up for my civil rights and the civil rights of others. And the lessons that they taught me would play a pivotal role in shaping me into the person that I am today. I had many aunts and uncles and cousins in the disability rights movement, and they all taught me very important lessons, and I took them all very seriously. Please move to slide 5. We were introduced to the Task Force on the Rights and Empowerment of Americans with Disabilities, created by Congressman Major Owens and headed by Justin Dart Jr., which would be the beginning of the journey to the passage of the ADA. The task force had begun their mission by collecting testimony from people with disabilities and their experiences with discrimination. Included in the testimony were the expectations of what we would like to see in the ADA and what protections the ADA would be able to address. Thousands of participants from all 50 states were asked to share their stories. My family were invited to participate and gave our testimony. These oral and written testimonies would later be called the ADA Diaries and would assist in establishing a record of discrimination that Justin would eventually submit to Congress. And on this slide, this is a picture of me and Justin at a protest in Washington, D.C., and he is handing me a bouquet of carnations. Please move to slide 6.
Yep. Jennifer, I'm just actually going to give one quick pause for you. So it looks like I'm showing the incorrect view. I'm just going to switch that for you real quick.
Okay.
1 second. Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
Here we go. Okay.
United States Senate, Americans with Disabilities Act, September 18th, 1989. Even though the Senate had already passed the ADA, the House was still stalling its full passage. As ADAPT of Arizona, Mom and I and Kaylee were in regular contact with Senator John McCain's office about updates regarding the ADA and its full passage. The next slide is a letter from Senator John McCain addressed to my mom regarding the importance of the ADA and his support of its full passage. The letter says, "Dear Cynthia, due to your interest in the legislation affecting disabled Americans, I would like to take this opportunity to update you on the status of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1989. I was proud to have been one of the primary authors of this landmark measure. As you may know, on September 7th, 1989, the Senate had voted 76-8 in favor of the ADA. I was pleased to see this overwhelming vote of confidence in support of this legislation. For far too long, the disabled have been left out of the mainstream of our communities. And I believe that Congress has an obligation to end this legal discrimination. The ADA is a necessary first step as we seek to open our communities to all who wish to participate. The path towards eliminating the disparity that exists between those who are disabled and those who are not has been an arduous one. However, I am pleased to see that Congress is now showing the political will to correct this inequity. The House will soon be considering this bill, and I have been told that the President hopes to sign this legislation into law later this fall. For your information, I have enclosed my statement from the congressional record. We must make sure that our goals of our founding fathers, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness be made available to all Americans. Sincerely, John McCain, United States Senator." Please move to slide 8. March 12th, 1990, the Capitol crawl. In response to this delay, disability rights groups from across the country organized to come together in Washington, D.C. and use their voices to tell Congress why it was important to pass the ADA without any further delay. This led to the Wheels of Justice March on Washington, D.C., the rally that was to follow, and led to the Capitol crawl. By this time, I had become a seasoned activist and had already been protesting for 2 years. When I decided to do the Capitol crawl, I realized that as one of the few young children who got to be so closely involved in this movement, I was not just representing myself, but I was representing my generation and future generations of kids with disabilities. So I was more determined than ever to make sure that I reached the top so that all of our voices would be heard. And 4 months later, on July 26, 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed into law by President H.W. Bush. On this slide, this is my personal photo of the Capitol crawl on March 12, 1990. In the photo, I am crawling up the second half of the Capitol building steps. I am surrounded by reporters with cameras and other adults with disabilities, and we are all crawling up the steps of the Capitol together. Alongside me, holding the styrofoam cup, was a young man who was my attendant for that day. And we are all wearing the turquoise ADAPT t-shirts with the words, "Wheels of Justice," and a large crowd of people are gathering at the bottom of the steps watching the protest. Please move to slide 9. Here is my White House invitation and ticket to the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act on July 26, 1990. The invitation says, "The White House, July 18th, 1990. Dear friend, on behalf of the President, we invite you to participate in the signing ceremony of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The President will sign this historic legislation on Thursday, July 26, 1990, at 10 a.m. on the South Lawn of the White House. This is a very special occasion, and we hope you can join us." The day that the ADA was signed into law was also the day that people with disabilities gained their independence, their dignity, and their civil rights. It was the day that people with disabilities were fully recognized and acknowledged as fellow citizens and human beings who have the right to fully participate in all aspects of society with dignity and respect, and therefore were no longer excluded. So it truly was a historic day. And for this reason, it is also known as Second Independence Day. Please move to slide 10. The ADA is now 32 years old, and although more public spaces are accessible, there is still more work to be done. It is important that we continue to use our voices and speak up and speak out to create positive change for full equality and access and full participation in the American dream under the ADA, 504, and all disability rights laws. The ADA is not just about physical access. It is also about personal empowerment and what it means to you and how it can empower you to use your voice to enforce and exercise your rights or the rights of your friends and family members. For example, if you need accommodations for school or at work or for housing, or if you need to enforce your existing accommodations, you should never be afraid to use your voice to advocate for yourself and your needs and the needs of others. When you speak up and advocate for yourself and others, you are not only empowering yourself, you are also empowering and creating a pathway for the next person. In the words of Justin Dart, disability is a normal part of the human experience. And when we empower ourselves, we are able to empower others. There's more to this law than what is written into it. We are the ones who give it its strength. And we are the ones as leaders in our communities responsible for passing it on to the next generation. And in this slide, this is a photo of me once I reached the top of the Capitol steps, and my mom is hugging me. Please move to slide 11. In the task force's final letter, Justin Dart Jr. and the task force says, celebrate the ADA, shout its message in living rooms, schools, churches, businesses, communities, governments, and public media. Implement the ADA. Keep the promises of the ADA by creating a cultural environment in which all people with disabilities can empower themselves as equal and productive participants in the American dream. Let us unite in action as never before. Together we have overcome, together we shall overcome. Please move to slide 12. Teaching disability history to the next generation. The disability rights movement is an important part of American history that is rarely discussed and taught in the classroom. I want to change that. I believe that kids and educators will learn and be empowered by this important part of America's history. Please move to slide 13. All the Way to the Top. All the Way to the Top is an illustrated bibliography children's book and my true story about my involvement in the disability rights movement, as well as my participation in the Capitol crawl from my 8-year-old point of view. I worked together with Annette Bay Pimentel, the author, and Nabi H. Ali, the illustrator, and Source Books, the publisher of the book, for 3 years. I also wrote the foreword for this book myself, so I think together we captured my 8-year-old voice perfectly. It does a wonderful job of opening the door to the conversation of the disability rights movement and the importance of the ADA to young children and their families. Please move to slide 14. I am proud that the book comes with a downloadable Common Core State Standard Aligned Teacher's Guide for grades 1 through 5. And it is free to download both on my website, JKC Legacy, as well as Source Books website. Please move to slide 15. The ADA is our tool to personal empowerment. Many people believe that when the ADA was passed into law, that enforcement would be automatic and understood. But from my personal experience, since the passage of the ADA in 1990, I can tell you that I've had to continue to fight for my rights and accommodations, and I had to learn about self-advocacy and personal empowerment in order to exercise and enforce my rights under the ADA. The ADA is our tool, but we are the ones who give it its power. Please move to the final slide. And now I would like to end my presentation by reading a portion of President Bush's ADA signing ceremony speech found in Work Life, a publication on employment and people with disabilities, Fall 1990, Volume 3, Number 3, ADA Special Issue. The ADA is a dramatic renewal, not only for those with disabilities, but for all of us, because along with the precious privilege of being an American comes the sacred duty to ensure that every other American's rights are also guaranteed. Together, we must remove the physical barriers that we have created and the social barriers that we have accepted. For ours will never be a truly prosperous nation until all within it prosper. Thank you very much, and I hope that you guys enjoyed my PowerPoint presentation.
You, Jennifer. I appreciate you going through all the slides and kind of giving us a brief rundown on your story. And what got you even into advocacy in general. It's actually really empowering. So again, thank you for sharing. You mentioned that you were protesting with the likes of Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, Dwayne French, Justin Dard, and Gary Olson. And you did briefly talk a little bit about that, but I was wondering if you can kind of go in a little bit into how growing up with advocates who you helped shape the path and how it's impacted where you are today based on your experiences with advocating with them.
I think that the number one lesson that the disability rights movement taught me and those advocates taught me was when you are advocating for yourself, you're not only doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for others. Mm-hmm. And so that was a very, very important lesson that they taught me. And I have carried that on throughout my life. I wasn't just doing the Capitol crawl, to represent myself. I was doing it to represent my generation and future generations of kids with disabilities. And I think that, that lesson is extremely important, because when you are advocating for yourself, you are also creating the next pathway for the next person. And you're opening the door for their journey for self-empowerment. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the major lessons that being involved in the disability rights movement and having all of those advocates teach me those lessons. That was the most important lesson that I learned.
Do you believe that you still utilize lessons learned in what you're doing today with your educational presentations and in your motivational speaking?
I do. One of the things that I believe is very important is to be able to teach young children and the next generation the importance of the ADA, so that they will be able to, in turn, empower themselves to use their voice to continue on the ADA's legacy. And so I do believe that I am, continuing that path even today.
Good. In the slide that you were showing of the letter from John McCain, you had read out the statement he made for the congressional record. We must make sure that the goals of our founding fathers, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, be made available to all Americans. In your opinion, what do you think is the biggest barrier to us achieving that goal?
I think that, one of the things that the ADA has accomplished is the fact that we do have greater physical access. We do have, greater access to education, to employment, and greater physical access to our world. But I also believe that our work is not finished. We still have a long way to go. And that's why it's even more important today to continue to use our voices to speak up and speak out, to continue that positive change, especially now. Just because the ADA is now 32 years old, that doesn't mean that our work is finished. It's even more important to continue our work today than I believe back then, for that reason.
Okay, so based off the amount of work you think still needs to be done and the direction that we need to take to still be done, how can we as advocates make sure our voice is being heard even louder than it is on the local level? With us being here in Alaska, what can we do locally and nationally as advocates to make sure that we're participating in the fight for change?
One of the things that I like to say is, if you are aware that something needs to change, a good place to start, a good place to have your voice heard, is to reach out to your congressmen and women and to tell them why the ADA is important to you, why we need to continue to fight for our rights under the ADA and all disability rights laws. And, to start there and to, to start there and to continue on with that. I think that it's very important that we continue to raise our voices and raise our concerns about what we need to do to continue to have full and equal access under the ADA and all disability rights laws. This is why I think it is so important that we continue to use our voices. One of the cool things about, when the ADA was passed is that this was a time when all of the disability rights groups came together to speak with one voice, to show Congress why it was important to pass the ADA without any further delay or weakening amendments. We spoke with one voice, and we were powerful and we were strong. And we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to come together, all of us, and speak with one voice and tell our government leaders why the ADA is important, why we need to continue to fight for access and fight for our rights under the ADA. And the other thing is the ADA, it's about personal empowerment and what it means to you personally, because everybody's journey is different. And so, one of the cool things about the ADA is it's a tool. It's a tool that we can use for our self-empowerment, and so that we can use our voices to tell our leaders and to tell our government that that this is a civil rights law. First and foremost, this is a civil rights law for people with disabilities, so that people with disabilities can have full and equal access to all areas of public life, But in order for that to happen, we have to continue to use our voices and to bring out those issues. I know that, for example, there's still issues in regards to affordable, accessible housing. There's issues in regards to, revamping the SSI benefits so that people with disabilities can get out of poverty. And this is why it's so important that we continue to share our stories and we continue to raise our voices and we continue to advocate and if all else fails, protest. We must continue to use our voices to defend our rights. And this is why it's so important.
Thank you for that. That was a great answer. Jumping back onto that government aspect of it, on your PowerPoint, you showed that you had attended the signing, and I'm kind of curious, you being 8 years old and going to an event like that at the White House, can you kind of talk a little bit about how your experience was attending that event and knowing the event that you were actually at? Do you like the impact that had?
Well, I was invited to the signing, but I didn't actually attend the signing. I actually gave up my seat to George Roberts, one of my friends and fellow advocates with Atlantis Adapt. Mm-hmm. And so I watched it on television, but I didn't actually attend the protest or attend the signing because I gave my seat up to George Roberts. He really wanted to go, and he was also part of the Gang of 19, if you're familiar with the Gang of 19, which was the original 19 people with disabilities who Wade Plank got out of the nursing homes here in Denver. And because he had been doing the protests and had been part of the Gang of 19, he really wanted to go. And me, being a kid, I really wanted to give him my seat so that he could do that. But I also was a little bit disappointed that I didn't get to go to the signing myself.
So I'm just going to assume that the impact might have been a little different, watching it on TV versus being there in person, but knowing that you could have went, and knowing that, one, it's amazing that you gave up your seat, even though you were a bit disappointed, but knowing what you were watching even on TV, I'm curious to know, what were you feeling watching that happen, knowing that you had a major part in getting to that point? Like, what were you feeling watching the president sign that?
I felt elated because even as a child, I knew how important this was as part of American history. I also felt proud, not just for myself, but for all those kids who were watching that on television the same as I was. And, knowing that their voices were finally being heard, and knowing that they were finally being acknowledged. That was a big deal to me. And so between that and having my own personal feelings of elation and of finally being heard and finally being recognized as part of society and part of American life, I mean, that was awesome. Because you have to remember, prior to the ADA, people with disabilities, we weren't recognized as that. And so this is why the ADA, again, is so important. And this is why we need to continue to to recognize it and to enforce it as a civil rights law for people with disabilities.
So speaking of making sure the next generation is also involved, you're currently doing motivational speaking engagements, you're doing educational presentations on the history of the ADA, also on basically how to be a great disability advocate when it comes to the ADA. So knowing that you're doing these things currently, this is your current career path that you've chosen, what is one piece of advice that you give to those that you're training or speaking to?
That is a great question. And I would then again go back to my presentation. It is important to teach young kids the importance of self-advocacy and what that does for them, and how that can open the door to getting access to education, to employment, to accommodations, and being able to use their voice to self-advocate for those needs. And to also know that when you are doing that, when you are advocating for yourself, you are also creating the pathway for the next person, so that they can advocate and empower themselves. And I think that that's extremely important. And that's part of what I want to, teach the next generation. And I feel that, as leaders, this is our duty to do. We have to, because the next generation is going to be the caretaker of the ADA and all disability rights laws. And so we need to be able to give them the same tools that I was given as a young child by the advocates and by the disability rights movement, so that they will be able to continue on the ADA's legacy and continue it on for generations.
Mm-hmm. So you're also, and it's based on what you just said and kind of where it needs to move forward to, your book, the book that was read about you all the way to the top, knowing that you had a very, a large hand in that book, even if, over the 3 years in that book becoming published. I have a 9-month-old daughter, and we're currently working on her library, but I love to find books for her that are disability inclusive, especially as somebody who has a disability like myself, do you think there's enough books and literature about disability diversity and inclusion among children's books?
I think that that is an area that we are actively working on, because I can tell you that as a child in the late 80s and early 90s, the books that we have now about disability, proper disability representation and inclusion, those books didn't exist when I was a kid. And so I love the direction that we're going in regards to that, but I think we need to continue to do that. I think we need to continue to bring those stories to the forefront, because disability is part of our history, and it is part of the human experience. And so, we need to continue to bring those stories up in the forefront for that reason, because we need to continue to recognize these stories as important parts of the American story, or as important parts of the human story. And that's why I feel that that we need to continue to bring these stories of inclusion and disability experience to the forefront.
Amazing. We are actually, so our door prize for today's session is actually going to be a couple of copies of this book for some amazing winners. I also ordered a copy for my daughter, so I'm super excited when it gets here. We do story time every evening. But one of the biggest questions that I have for you is, it's more of a personal question. So knowing what you do, what your current career path is with the speaking and the education, I'd like to know, where do you want it to go? Like, what's your dream regarding your actual, like your LLC? What's the dream that you want to see happen for the current career path that you're on?
I would like to see the disability rights movement and the ADA and all of that be fully recognized and implemented as part of school curriculum. I would like to see it taught in all schools across the country as part of school curriculum and part of America's history, because like I said in my presentation, this is a subject that is rarely talked about and taught, especially in the classroom. How can we empower the next generation? How can we empower our kids about this important part of history if they don't know about it, or if they just learn about it from other places like the internet? It needs to be taught and recognized and be viewed as just as important as the civil rights movement and as other important parts of our history. And that is what I would like to see. And that's why I am so happy and so proud that the book comes with a Common Core state-aligned teacher's guide. I mean, this is recognized as curriculum, and it's currently being taught that way in several school districts. And so I'm super happy about that. But we need to continue that.
That's amazing that it's even in some of the school districts right now, just as a basic curriculum. And I absolutely agree with you. Growing up, I didn't learn about a lot of this stuff until after I was already out of school, because it's not something that was very upfront back in the early 90s when I was going through school. So I definitely agree with you on that. One of our participants wants to know what keeps you going, like what keeps you fighting and advocating for yourself and others.
What keeps me going the most right now is the wonderful questions and things that I get from students all across the country, and how they love to learn about this important part of our history. And also, another thing that keeps me going is the ability to pass on my experience to others, because I believe that in and of itself is important, because these are the things that we need to have and we need to share, so that we can continue to empower others as well.
Who would you say is your biggest supporter?
Who is my biggest supporter? That would be my family and my mom. She has been my biggest supporter and my biggest advocate since I was born. And so, but I cannot forget, the others within the movement. I cannot forget Justin Dart and Yoshiko, and Bob Kafka and Dwayne French, and everybody that I grew up with, and who taught me. This was my childhood, and I loved it, and I loved the things that they taught me, because I knew that I would have a responsibility to pass it on to others, because it's never just been about me. It's been about my friends who were also being discriminated against, and it was about all those kids who who weren't there, but who were feeling the same way I was as a kid. And often I would feel, as a kid, that just because I was a kid, that didn't mean that my voice didn't matter, because it does. And your voice matters too. You can make a difference. You can make a change, even if you're just a kid, even if you just think that, I don't know if I can do it. All it takes is one thing about speaking up and speaking out. One thing that you see needs to change, and being able to speak up and speak out about that. That's starting that path to change. But change only occurs when we do speak up and we do speak out. And that's why it's important to continue to do that. One of the things that my book says at the end is, even though the ADA has been passed and that there's more physical access, laws like the ADA don't change things overnight, and that's true. Slowest of all, minds have to change. And part of that mind changing is that continuous attitudinal barrier and ableism that people with disabilities continue to experience even today. And this is why, it is so important to continue on to create that path of change, not just for yourself, but for the next person. And I think that this is part of the work that we still need to do. When the ADA was passed, many entities had 30 years to comply. Well, the 30 years are up. So now it's time for enforcement and true implementation of the ADA. Well, what does that look like? Well, let's first start with, speaking up and speaking out. And that starts with using your voice to enforce your accommodations at work, using your voice to, bring about a change that needs to happen, either within your community or within the United States as a whole. But it all starts with us being able to speak up and speak out. And remember, we are at our strongest when we speak up and speak out together. That's when change happens. And that's what the cool thing about getting the ADA passed was. And that was the fact that all these disability rights groups came together to speak with one voice, to show Congress why it was important to pass the ADA. We need to do that again. We need to support each other. We need to be there for each other. And we need to continue to use our voices together to create change.
So it is It's five of, and I honestly want to tell you, like, I'm going to stop the questions there. There was one additional question, and that's definitely something, it's just basically, how do you report like ADA standards that aren't up to ADA standards? But the way that you just ended that last statement, I think is a perfect conclusion to this tea talk. You gave us a direction on where we need to keep going. And I think that's very helpful. So I've been doing this for over 2 decades, and honestly, by doing it so long, and you might get this sometimes as well for being an advocate, as long as you have, that sometimes you get tired and you get burnt out, especially when things aren't happening as quick as you want them to, or to the same like amount that you want them to happen. So in talking with you today, and I'm almost positive that I'm going to have individuals agree with me that are listening in, you've kind of given us back our rigorous fight. You know what I mean? Like, for me in itself, you've given me back that pep that was slowly starting to dissipate. You kind of give that back to me a little bit. So I greatly appreciate that. And listening to your story, but also not just your experiences, but what work still needs to be done and the tools to still use it, and knowing that the ADA is a tool and we're the ones that give it its power, is really empowering in itself. So I'm extremely grateful for your experiences, because it's helping shape the movement, and the fact that the movement is still going. Do you know what I mean? So it's definitely been amazing. So we do want to thank you so much for joining and coming back from July's tech issues and joining us in August. And it's we would love to have further conversation with you at some point, and maybe even arrange some self-advocating workshops with you and your company. I think would be amazing for our consumers as well. I do want to just briefly, we do have our door prize winners. So thank you so much, Tamara Douglas and Andy Korak. So if you guys can throw your emails to me, or if you can just give me your emails, I'll make sure we reach out to you guys so you can get a copy of All the Way to the Top, Jennifer's book about her story. Jennifer,
let me just interrupt here, you guys, for just a second.
Absolutely.
I do have a special book plate that I created that has my picture of when I did the Capitol crawl, and I signed the book plate. And I also have a copy of the Schneider Family Honor Book seal in Braille. Mm-hmm. So if you will give me your address, I will send you a couple of book plates with my signature, as well as the Schneider Family Honor Book seal in Braille, so that the people that got their door prizes will have a signed copy.
Absolutely, we could do that. Thank you for doing that. That's amazing. And absolutely, I will do that. Okay, so my apologies again. So Andy and Tamara, if you can throw it in the Q&A section briefly, so I can get your emails, we'll do it that way. Jennifer, do you have any last, any statement or anything, or any comment you want to leave us with?
Well, I think that that this was awesome, and I want to thank Access Alaska again for giving me this opportunity to speak with all of you, and I am so glad to be able to share my story with you guys. And I do have something really cool coming up. I have created special edition ADA 32 t-shirts that I have done all the artwork for. On the front is a rendition of my logo, and then on the back I did a picture of Justin Dart that I drew myself, and so I'm really super happy about all of that. Right now I'm still working on the bugs that I have with shipping, but I should have that up and running here real soon. And then like I said, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you guys. I really appreciate it, and I hope to speak with you more.
Absolutely. And I think having, like, in a little while, I'm going to reach out to you again, because I'm definitely going to have questions and some follow-up, and having a conversation in yourself or with yourself. I think it's going to be really good follow-up just to have those conversations. Again, thank you so much for giving us your time and for sharing your story and for sharing your tools and how we can continue the fight as well on our end. So I really appreciate that. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. You are always amazing every time you attend our Tea Talks. And congratulations again to Tamara and Andy. We will get those books, the signed copy of the books, out to you guys here shortly. And if anybody has any further questions or comments or wishes to get a hold of Jennifer, you can absolutely go to her website. Once the distribution things are settled with her t-shirts, you'll also be able to get those from her website. I'm already going to be ordering one. I already know. So don't hesitate to head on over and take a look. And if anybody also just wants to read a little bit more about Jennifer, if you go to the History Channel's website, she's the front page for the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's our very first image is right there for everybody to see and to read more about Jennifer as well. So again, thanks everybody. And we hope you have an amazing rest of your day.